Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. I'm going to be honest with everyone today. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm never nervous. I've been doing this since 2020. I'm a huge fan of my guest today. It's kind of like, I think I've interviewed over 200 guests at this point over the years, and very rarely am I nervous to meet anybody, but I definitely am today. But I'm going to start with this before I bring Marianne in. I met with a spiritual healer yesterday. And what's interesting is we talked a lot about ego. And so Marianne's book, which we're going to talk about when I introduce her in a second, it was so interesting because I talk so much to this spiritual healer about all the things that I'm going through and generational pain and trauma and all the things that I've dealt with since childhood, the loss of my sister, my dad, my best friend. And I left this session. It was like probably a 3-hour session. And I left the session and I felt myself like so emotional. I felt like I had run a marathon basically. And I felt myself feeling so grateful just to be in the moment. I'm really struggling right now, like so many of us are, with what's going on in the world. And so I'm just excited to have Marianne on today. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
Hi, Marianne. Marianne is
Hey.
Marianne Williamson is an author, speaker, activist. She is a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list for A Return to Love, a reflection on the principles of A Course in Miracles. Her new book is called, I'm going to hold it up, everyone, if you're watching on YouTube, Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. I had to turn it because I can't see anything in the screen's too small. She also was known as a frequent guest on Oprah Winfrey, which I remember being a kid and watching you on this. And I also read that you started Project Angel Food, which is amazing. So she's just done so many things. She was a presidential candidate, which I left out, which I watched you on that debate stage. So really, honestly, I'm just kind of fangirling out. So I'm just going to say that as we begin today's podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. It's a true, true honor.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I'm glad to be in conversation with you.
So let's start with, what do you tell people? I follow you on Instagram. And so I've seen some of your latest posts about what's going on in the world. It's devastating right now to me to see all the things that are going on. And I know that I have listeners that listen, Republicans, Democrats, wherever you stand. But at the core of what I think is going on right now is just terrifying. And I feel like every other morning I wake up trying to limit my news, but it's hard to stay away from. I mean, just the fact that we feel like all of our country that we love so much is just being torn to shreds. Can you kind of give my listeners and myself some feedback on what you think?
Well, you mentioned earlier about trauma. It is traumatizing. It's traumatizing to see the destructiveness that is being perpetrated. Of course, it's being perpetrated in the name of getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. But I think more and more people are seeing what a ruse that is. It's an effort really to destroy the government, to so diminish its capacity to serve its citizens that people would be willing to buy into the idea that obviously our government doesn't work, so we should try some other system. This isn't Democrat versus Republican. You know, I'm writing an article right now. I'm quoting Ronald Reagan. This is those who believe in the basic constitutional principles established at the founding of our country versus those who are following this rather horrifying neo-technological, basically neo-fascist perspective by which many people have decided that actually a dictatorship would be better. And that's why I think so many people have a problem with Elon Musk. Donald Trump is the elected president of the United States, and he has all of the constitutional authority thereof. Now, a lot of people, including myself, have a problem even with some of his actions because we need to preserve the three co-equal branches of government. That's basic to our constitutional system. However, he is the president. Elon Musk has not only unelected, yes, he's appointed by the president, but to carry the kind of authority he does, never having been vetted in the ways that people with anything near that level of power would be vetted, working with a team of people, also unvetted, none of whom are experienced in government. And you were talking about trauma and terror. We have already seen 75,000 people who have taken the deferred payment, the resignation, basically, buyout. And now the White House has said of today, it's demanding that all agencies come up with hundreds of thousands, to identify hundreds of thousands of possible layoffs over the next 2 weeks. And I think, or by March 13th, I think it's important to remember, if you want to make your government more efficient, who wouldn't sign on to that? If you would even say, let's get rid of the bloat, get rid of the fat, I think we'd all sign on to that. This, however, is cutting into the bone. This is cutting into agencies that give vital services to people all around this country. Yes, particularly the most disadvantaged among us, but not only the most disadvantaged among us. And some of the changes are absolutely cruel. For instance, stopping the telehealth part of, by I think April 25th, of Medicare. There are so many old people, elderly people in this country, particularly elderly people working, who living in rural neighborhoods, who would have absolutely no capacity, no ability, either physically or in some other way, to get to a doctor's office. So some of these changes make no sense out of the context of the perpetration of absolute cruelty and trauma onto people. By the way, Russ Vought was head of the OMB. That's a very powerful position. He was confirmed by the Senate. This is a man who has actually said that his goal was for the federal workforce, people who work for the government, to wake up traumatized every day. He said of the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, he also said that we are living in a post-constitutional chapter because that's what it would take to defeat the liberals. Now, I'm sorry. We only want to defeat other people at the ballot box. I'm on the left side of the political spectrum. I don't want to defeat conservatives, except on election day. Then, it's called elections. Other than that, it's important that we remember we all have a right to be here. No one has a monopoly on the truth. No one owns this country. And there are some people highly empowered in the government today who feel that America, as we know it, should belong to a certain group of people, actually, with certain viewpoints politically, even religiously. And this is very dangerous. And of course, it's traumatizing to all of us, not just on the, left, right. Really, this is not a left-right issue. There are millions, I believe. Now, that's just my opinion. And I can't tell you millions that I know, but I know a lot of people who voted for Trump who did not think they were voting for this.
Well, that's actually a good point that I'm glad you brought up, because it's a struggle for me personally. Like, if you have family, okay, so I obviously supported Kamala in this past election. I always was an independent. Now I consider myself a Democrat just because of all the issues. My best friends are gay. Families are being torn apart. People are being shackled and sent back on planes by ICE. It truly is reminding me of Nazi Germany and all of the writings that I have read. Elon Musk, you brought up that point, nobody voted for him. Nobody vetted him. He's pretty much our president at this point. That's why everyone's calling him President Musk. And in my lifetime, I've always been so proud to be an American. You know, it's like part of my identity. And I've brought this up before on the podcast that after September 11th happened, I remember being so proud. Like we would be driving in traffic and somebody would cut you off and you'd wave at them and say, thank you. Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Because we were, as a country, like, this is who we are. Didn't matter if you were a Republican or a Democrat. We're Americans. And so when you bring up that point, I think the divide that they're causing and the misinformation, and you bring it up in your book of like social media and all of the things and the AI and all the things that are like kind of like destroying people's brains. And they want us to be against each other. They want us to fight. And that's what I think at the end of the day, you bring up. There's a very famous quote by Walt Whitman, which is, I'm going to probably butcher it, but if we don't all do well, nobody does well. Meaning our country, we need the people picking strawberries in Oxnard, California, where, you know, I live in LA. We need these people. They're scared to go to work. So, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but if you're a listener right now, I just want you to not just, if say you're watching Fox News and you're really like set on watching Fox News, that's the only source of where you're getting your information. Take a second to read something. That's not something where you always get your information. Go to CNN, watch Fox News. I mean, I'm not telling you to watch Fox News. I don't watch Fox News, but I'm telling you, read. Get your, like, there's facts out there that are so important that people are just, this isn't, like you said, Republican and Democrat. And it's right? Correct? Go ahead.
Absolutely. And also there are some very decent, journalists on Fox News, such as John Roberts. When I was running for president, Neil Cavuto, who is no longer there, used to have me on. He was very fair and had a very reasonable conversation with me about the issue. So even though there are the extremist elements, and liars who don't even pretend that they don't lie on Fox, there are also legitimate news sources there as well. And I think that's important on both sides, that we not just make these, you know, stereotypical, because there are some people who I think have some valid problems with MSNBC as well. I mean, we have on both sides, unfortunately, people who are basically just giving the talking points for their particular side. And that is a problem in itself, because if you can't any longer look to your legacy news sources and really be able to reasonably expect an unfiltered, unvarnished look at the news, then we're in trouble. And that's why a lot of people are moving into more independent sources and so forth. One of the things that you just mentioned was about how you felt being proud to be an American. This is so important that we realize the policies now being promulgated are not only traumatizing hundreds of thousands of Americans, and it will be millions of Americans once these policies really start affecting people's lives. It's traumatizing people around the world. Mm-hmm. Look at Canadians right now. I can't even imagine how furious people feel that he takes this conversation about, for instance, turning Canada into the 51st state. Now, this is a line we have crossed. So many people have said, and I've heard them and we've all heard them, oh, Marianne, don't take him so seriously. He just says these things. He doesn't mean them. It's just his way of trolling you. Don't even worry about it. Look at his policies. These people are serious about things now that you almost can't even believe they're serious about. Take something like when Canada is our 51st state, so they say. The press secretary in the White House, in the press room of the White House the other day, was making a comment saying, Canada, soon to be our 51st state.
It's dangerous.
Thank you.
It's dangerous.
Thank you.
Or Gaza. Or
did you see that video about Gaza?
It's again, I feel it's almost like, I feel like I'm in a movie, or taking over Greenland and calling it red, white, and blue land. This is all about ego. You know, people need, I mean, I'm telling you, listeners, I have listeners all over the world. Let me apologize, because I want to apologize. There's more Americans out there right now that are like, what's going on? And I know that my country is filled with great people, but I also know that I will not sit back and just watch my country be taken away. We just can't. So, right? Like, speak up. Tell me what you think on that.
Well, I think let's go to the topic of Greenland. Okay. Now, there is historical precedence for presidents buying territory. McKinley bought Alaska from the Russians. Thomas Jefferson did the Louisiana Purchase. So in and of itself, buying property, buying land is not in and of itself outrageous. What's outrageous is that these territories are not for sale. Mm-hmm. So supposedly in the conversation, Greenland is technically pretty much owned by Denmark. So the prime minister or the premier, I'm not sure what it is called there, of Denmark had a conversation on the phone with Donald Trump. He said, I want it. Now, they want these things. He was talking about how we need it for our security. A lot of this has to do with the rare earth minerals. The rare earth minerals issue is always also going on in Ukraine. The president said, I want Greenland. The head of Denmark said, well, I'm sorry, sir. Greenland is not for sale. Trump said, I want it. And they said, well, maybe we can come up with some kind of a deal. Now, this is what people need to understand. Whether it's Mexico, or Canada, or Panama, or Denmark, or any place else, or Ukraine right now, or what he's doing with Jordan by saying you're going to take the refugees. Sometimes people say, look, he's a tough negotiator and he knows how to make a good deal. Okay, it's like we were saying before about is there fat? Is there bloat? Sure, take the fat, take the bloat, but don't take the bones. So what we are talking about is transitioning from someone who's a tough negotiator, even in some places where maybe most Americans would say, well, good, if we were taken advantage of, this is going from a tough negotiator to more like an image of a mafia boss. More like an image of a straight up old fashioned imperialist. Because this is the deal, and this part is not funny. This president, if he chooses to, could make life economic hell for Canada. He could make it economic hell for Denmark. If you see what happened when he said about Jordan, they're going to take the Gazan refugees. They don't want to take the Gazan refugees. They are already saturated with as many as they can take. The president said, oh, they will. If you see the picture of them shaking hands in the White House and the look on the face of King Abdullah when he had said, we'll take, I can't remember how many, was it 2,000 ill people or maybe it was 20,000 or 200. I'm not sure. But the point is, we have economic leverage that goes beyond economic leverage, that goes more into, well, it would really, really a shame if something happened to all that money that you have for your dam or for whatever you have in your country that is absolutely needed. And I think people need to wake up. I think people need to stop being naive. I think people need to recognize the signs here of someone whose style of leadership and the content, not just his style. This is not just about his style. We all know his style. Some people say, I don't mind it, and they wanted to vote for him, fine. I'm talking about his substance. It is imperialistic. It is domineering. It is more like a mafia boss than a president of the United States. It is showing no respect for the people of the United States. It is showing no respect for the people of the world. It is very dangerous. It is going to hurt our security. It is going to deeply hurt our economy. This will be demonstrated over the next year or so. And
it's already hurting our economy.
Yeah.
This is already hurting our economy. I'm sorry to talk over you. There's so much damage that's already been done, which is terrifying. And if you didn't believe, I mean, there's so many lies that were told about Project 2025 not happening.
Oh, he didn't know anything about it. He
didn't know anything about it. And now we're in the thick of it. We're in the thick of it. Read to the end of Project 25, everyone, because that's where we need to educate ourselves. Do your homework. Read. Tomorrow, I'm going to say this. Tomorrow is the economic blackout. I personally am promoting that. I say shop mom and pop. You can still go to restaurants. You can still shop. Small business needs your business. But if you can, like, you know, all of the companies that supported anti-DEI, please, like, we need to, these are ways, correct, Marianne, that we can kind of take our power back a little bit. It's all about the pocketbook. And then what happens is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this goes well, nobody wants to see our economy suffer, but look at the stock market today. It's already struggling. I mean, there's signs, eggs are clearly not going down in price. All the things that were promised already. You know, Mike Johnson was on Today this morning talking about how they're not going to cut in. You brought up Medicaid. This $1 trillion cut is not going to go into Medicaid. Well, my mom is on Medicaid. She's 81 years old. What will people do? Like you said, that can't have insurance. Go ahead.
What they're saying is, oh, we're not going to cut into Medicare. We're not going to cut into Medicaid. What they're cutting into is what they are cutting into is the committees that are in charge of Medicaid and Medicare. So this is their way of appearing to their constituents like they're taking care of Medicare and Medicaid, but actually behind the scenes demanding billions of dollars in cuts from the agencies that run those things. So then the agencies would have to cut into them. Yeah.
I mean, it all makes sense, but it's like people, I don't blame you. Like you brought up, you have friends that voted for him. You know, you're not bad people, and we shouldn't villainize each other anymore. Like that's all anybody's doing. But it's truly time for us to come up with plans. If you're worried about your family, like I am, and I'm worried about what's going to happen, you know, 6 months from now, my ways of being able to give back are, you know, getting involved in tomorrow, like not shopping in Target. These are all ways that I think we can help, right? So do you have any other advice before I kind of go into questioning some questions on your book on how people can kind of help here and get some control back?
It's very important that we educate ourselves. There is a lot of excellent content out there to really enable you to understand what's happening. I recommend breaking points. I know I put on my stories on my Instagram page, I put various content that's out there. There's great content on TikTok, content online among independent media. And I think that's very important. It's exhausting, and that's part of the strategy, to exhaust us, to wear us down to the point where I just can't take it. But it's important. You can't allow yourself to be overwhelmed. But even if you say, I will spend some time every day, this is not something where you can afford to look away. This is not something where we can afford to fall asleep. But at the same time, no one is asking one person to take on the whole thing. The zeitgeist at this moment is the choir. Each of us has to play our own note. Some of us, it's educating ourselves. I think you want to use your own social media platform. Every time you see a lie, meet it with the truth. Every time you see some piece of propaganda, meet it with an article that is stating the truth of what's going on there. Now, some people might say, oh, I only have 50 followers. What does it matter? You never know who's going to read it. You never know who's going to read it. When hate is yelling this loud, love cannot afford to just whisper. Now, Gandhi was asked, who is the leader of the Indian independence movement? And his response was, the small, still voice within. Each and every one of us, Meghan, one person it will be your podcast, one person it will be your social media account, one person it will be your own relationships and some local action, some town hall, some group, some nonprofit, whatever you feel moved to do. But we need to all see ourselves right now as immune systems, immune cells in a larger immune system of healing the body politic. And as long as we have that sense, I'm available, I'm ready, I'm receptive to serve my country at this very difficult, dangerous hour, then the ways that we can participate in meaningful ways, I think will be made available to all of us. You and I just participating in this conversation. You know, you could have decided that in your podcast, you're only going to talk about things that have no relevance to this moment. But you said in your own heart, this is too important. And I certainly agree with you.
It's too important.
No,
and
this
I
is
know
our democracy.
I've lost followers already. And I'm
sure
fine
you
with
have.
that. I'm fine with that. I didn't want my podcast to ever be a political podcast, but let me just end this thought that this is too important. This isn't about politics. So take the word politics out of this. This is about saving human rights, humanity. Look at what happened with USAID. Like, this is about doing the right thing.
Well, you know, I think the word politics has been kind of perverted. All that politics means is our collective behavior. So if you were going to say, when it comes to my individual actions, there are ethical questions I ask. What does it mean to be a good person? I think we should ask those same questions about policy. I don't think policy should be morally neutral. And we're not a business. We should be more like a well-run, ethical family. You put feeding the children first. You don't feed the children because it's going to make a profit. You don't feed the children because it's efficient. You feed children because it's the right thing to do. And I believe that all public policy should help people thrive. Gandhi said politics should be sacred. And I don't think he meant by that it should be doctrinaire or dogmatic. He meant it that when we talk about politics, it should be from the same place of consciousness with which we approach the deepest, most meaningful things in our lives. I think politics we've got to start seeing it as a layer of a well-lived, meaningful life. So our dissociation from politics over the last few decades is what paved the way for this. Oh, I'm not political. If you're a citizen, you know, the French say, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. And that's what's happening right now. You think you're not political, right? Well, watch this. And that's what's happening right now. So I think we need to reclaim the word politics for simply concerning ourselves with that which is not just my life, but also our life, not just my behavior, but our behavior. That's what politics should be. And I think that is part of spiritual maturity, social maturity, and obviously political maturity to realize that.
Can I ask you one last question about this? Is that part of why you ran for president?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
The biggest part.
You know, what happened for me, Meghan, was from the very beginning of my career, because when my career began, the AIDS crisis was almost simultaneous with it. And that put me on a path to a career in which being up close and personal with people in their hardest times was very, very common. But when my career began back in 1983, and for many years after that, when I met people for whom the results had just come back and it was cancer, bankruptcy is the only option, a loved one suddenly died, the terrible agonizing things that can happen in life. For the vast majority of people I met, this crisis was a one-time thing. It was the exception, not the rule. Life basically worked, and then something horrible happened. What I started to see in the late 1990s was that America had shifted. And I met so many people for whom the crisis was the rule and not the exception. So the problem wasn't just that they were diagnosed with cancer. The problem was they didn't have health care. The problem was not just that they needed a job. It's that they couldn't feed a family on just one job. And I began to see that the system itself, that America had transitioned into a place where we no longer had a thriving middle class, where fewer and fewer people had access to just a life of basic dignity and relative enough ease that you could, have the bandwidth to read to your kids at night and not just be in constant economic struggle. Now, I had always been, from the early days of my career, very active in nonprofits. But I began to see that private charity alone could not compensate for basic lack of social justice. And then, when people started using the word resilient, why should people have to be so resilient in the richest country in the world? What's going on here? The whole conversation about resilience implies the acceptance of the fact life is hard in this country. Why? Why? And the reason why is because of a $50 trillion transfer of wealth over the last 50 years into a very tiny group of Americans. What is happening now with what Trump and Musk are doing and these obscene tax cuts for the very, we're talking about the very wealthiest. Like the Republicans, not one Republican is willing to tax anyone, to increase taxes for anyone, even over $10 million. Even in they'll say, well, how about 50 million? How about $1 billion? I know a billionaire in LA who once said to me, my taxes are so low, it's obscene. So a lot of this cutting that they're doing is in order to increase these tax cuts, which will add over $4.5 trillion to our debt over the next 10 years. This is so brazen and so obvious, and that it's all being done under this canard of being there for America first. This is an international crime syndicate behind all this, and they're America first, like you and I are, have green skin.
Yeah. Well, it could have just been so much better, but now I'm going to get into your book because you do kind of talk about this stuff in the book. In the very beginning of the book, you talk about, and I have to tell you this, and don't take this the wrong way. So if I say this, but I like your humor in your writing. You're such a beautiful writer.
Thank you.
Some of the book I was reading, and then you kind of make fun of yourself a little bit, which I love because I love to make fun of myself. I think being self-deprecating is kind of a gift. If we take ourselves too seriously in life,
it's important. It's important not to take ourselves too seriously because life is so serious. People who take themselves too seriously usually don't take life seriously enough. What's going on out there is hugely serious. And that's the serious stuff.
But you talk about what I love is, and I found so interesting, is that you talk about your dad in the beginning, and that you took this course on Jesus, and you grew up Jewish, and it's such a thing that you're like, wait a second. I grew up Roman Catholic. I went to Catholic school my whole life. I'm very spiritual. I still go to mass. I don't obviously necessarily believe in 100% of everything that's taught to me. But what I do believe in is Jesus. I believe in God. I don't know what exactly I believe, but when you talk in the beginning about how you were going to take this course and your dad, it was funny to me. I thought it was really funny that your dad was like, why would you do that? And your mom was kind of supportive, but your dad wasn't.
My mother said to me, let me get this straight. You're going to stay in California. I went, yeah. And you're going to give lectures. And I said, yeah. About Jesus. I said, yeah. To Christians. Now, remember, I'm Jewish. It's not that I was brought up Jewish. I am Jewish. I went, yeah. And there's a long silence. And then she says, what will you wear?
I loved it. I love
what will you wear?
I love it. It's such a great way to open a book.
And she started trying to be very helpful. She said, now listen, I think when Christians go to church, I think your skirt should be a little longer because I think that they're more conservative than you are the way you do. She's trying to be helpful. Yeah. And then my father, this is when I'd started lecturing on A Course in Miracles. And my father, and if you had said to my parents, I'm going to get a PhD in comparative religion and teach at universities, that makes sense to them. And they said, or if you want us to send you to rabbinical school, that made sense to them. But remember, especially in those days, and when my career began, what you and I do didn't exist. Mm-hmm. It's this idea of a woman just standing up and talking about God because she reads a book. It didn't even exist. So it was beyond their sense of the box that you could possibly have a career. Like, what are you doing? So my father, everything is, I think my mother asks me questions and she translates them to my father or whatever. So my father, we were at my grandmother's or my uncle's, I can't remember, for Sunday breakfast. He said, "Come here, I want to talk to you." When my father has that serious a tone of voice, it was not that common. "Come here, I want to talk to you." And he looked at me and he went, "It's the same God, isn't it?" And I said, "Oh, Daddy, of course it's the same God. Of course it's the same." He said, "Okay, because I don't want to hear it's like another God or something." I went, "Yeah, Daddy, it's the same God. There's one God."
I love it. I also thought it was just that they were supportive of it because so many, or like went along with the idea of you also kind of talk in the beginning of in the book about how you had this nervous breakdown. If I'm wording that correctly.
Well, yes, but I have to say, I think that would be translated in today's terms. I went through my 20s.
Yes.
I mean, I really have a problem, Meghan, with a lot of this mental health conversation in America today. The 20s are hard.
Yeah.
Even for people who don't have specific traumatic events, the 20s are hard. Individuation process in the 20s, it's hard. And I am very concerned by how so many young people have been made to think something is wrong with them. And of course, it leads a lot to what I believe is an over pharmaceuticalization. And it's also a great weakening of women. I think 1 in 4 American women are currently diagnosed as clinically depressed. And by the way, all that means is someone in a clinic said it. This theory of the chemical imbalance thing has been completely debunked. Although when I ran for president the first time, everyone said I was so irresponsible about mental health to argue that. And yet now it's been debunked. So the idea that a woman, 1 in 4 American women are depressed, has been made to make women feel like there's something wrong with you, as opposed to we're depressed because we know something is wrong. And that's what's been happening in the last 2 to 4 or 5 decades, is American women have known in our gut something's wrong here. And we were made to feel something was wrong with us for thinking something was wrong. And it turns out, no, something was very, very wrong.
I think that it's a really valid point. I mean, obviously I'm a mental health podcast. I talk about my own struggles with, depression, and I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. So but I do agree with you about the 20s and how, there's a pill for everything now. And it's really about, I think that's why I found the book so special, is that you talk about, I won't call it a mental breakdown, but that's what you kind of called it in the book. And then
it would have been called that at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you talk about this man sitting at the edge of your bed, and he's sitting upright, and you just kind of talk about it and you're like, yeah, it was Jesus. And honestly, like, maybe most people would be like, that's interesting for a Jewish woman to like think that was Jesus. Well, but go ahead.
Well, first of all, there's a lot to this. First of all, Jews don't have a problem with Jesus. We have a problem with Christianity over the years because some heinous things were done historically. But Jesus was a Jew. Jews don't have a thing about. But by that time, remember, I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. That was the part that was, the gap in there. So when I first saw The Course in Miracles, which is a self-study program of spiritual psychotherapy, because of the traditional Christian language, I did think, oh, this is not for me. Not that I've ever been taught anything as a child other than that. We don't read that book, honey. We read the other Bible, right? So there was nothing negative. It's just I had no exposure to it. But when I first saw this book, A Course in Miracles, and I saw that language, I thought, oh, this just isn't for me. When I looked at it again, within a few pages, it becomes obvious this is not a religion. There's no dogma. There's no doctrine. It's not trying to get us to believe in God. It's not trying to get us to believe in Jesus. It's trying to get us to believe in one another, which is the experience of God and belief in ourselves.
So you talk about this man and how he kind of saved
so
you.
By the time what had happened was I did go through a tragedy in my life, actually. And it was a terrible experience. And it was a many, many sleepless nights experience. And I did begin to feel that there was, now remember, I didn't feel there was a human man sitting on my bed. It was, they use the word shade. It was almost like a shadow of a man. And also it was someone taller and thinner than a regular man. But it felt to me like there was a presence. And it elicited no fear. And that was when, although I'd been a student of the Course, the Jesus thing just hadn't, I think there's so many layers of the teachings of the Course, and the whole Jesus part of it hadn't really penetrated my awareness on that deeper level. And I thought, wow. And he was sitting perpendicular, so he wasn't like at the end of my bed looking at me. He was at the end of my bed, 90 degrees, sitting very tall, upright, and I sensed. Now, somebody might hear that and go, well, she have no proof of that. Well, no, of course I'd have no proof of that.
I found really fascinating, and the fact that you decided to write this book. Why did you decide to write the book?
Well, remember, I started the Course in Miracles in 1977 about 1977 or 76. So I've been a student of the Course in Miracles for many decades at this point. And my editor called me and said, an interesting thing, Marianne, is we get calls about people asking, do you have any books that are about Jesus but not Christianity? A lot of people, and you were talking about being Catholic, and a lot of people over the last few decades have rejected the doctrine and dogma of organized religions and then found out, wait, I threw away the baby with the bathwater. I didn't want to not have a relationship with God. I didn't want to not have a relationship with Jesus, or I didn't want to not have a relationship with the Bible, or the values, or the spiritual gold. I just don't want all the doctrine and dogma, some of which does not work for me, does not sound pure to me anymore. And so this was something I'd always hoped that I would get to write. And I thought, I'm at an age where a lot of the things that you thought, someday I'll like to do that. I'm in that someday period of life where.
Well, I'm sorry, you don't look like you're in the someday period, so I'm just going to add that.
Thank you.
But there's certain chapters that really I loved. Okay, one of the things that you talk about is forgiveness. Okay, and for me, I have a horribly difficult time with forgiveness. I've been very hurt. And so you talk about forgiveness, and it was so beautifully written that I reread the chapter and listened to it because it helped me so much. Can you kind of go into that piece of it? Because I loved that piece of it.
The conversation about forgiveness in A Course in Miracles is not the way we normally think of the word. And that's true of that's what the Course is all about. Traditional Christian terms reinterpreted in profoundly psychotherapeutic ways. So the old-fashioned kind of forgiveness is, I'm spiritual. You are a jerk, but I choose to forgive you. The Course in Miracles says, no, that's just further judgment. Spiritual superiority. Forgiveness from a spiritual, metaphysical, miracle-minded perspective is the realization that the essence of who you are is innocence. The essence of who I am is innocent. The level of our guilt, and if you have a hard time with forgiveness, it's because somebody did you wrong. Mm-hmm. But the Course in Miracles says, you were not created to be at the effect of lovelessness within yourself or someone else. So whatever someone did to you could hurt your body, could hurt your feelings, could do a lot to you, but it couldn't even touch the real you. And enlightenment is a shift in perception in self-perception from body identification to spirit identification. If I only identify with my mortal self, people can do terrible things to me. And I'm a human being, and emotions are valid, and you have to process. But the ultimate healing is the realization that only love is real, nothing else exists. That whatever was done to me, the universe is automatically programmed the moment it occurred, kind of like a GPS. You take a wrong turn, the universe instantly recalibrates. And if I am willing, just willingness is everything in the Course in Miracles, to extend my perception beyond what someone did to who I know in my heart they are, then over time, and I say over time, because, and I think you'll psychologically, I would think, find this fascinating, the 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, like the 40 years in the Old Testament between the slavery in Egypt and the entrance to the promised land, are the symbols for the time it takes for the universe, as it were, in the realm of manifestation to catch up with the change in your consciousness. So it's a willingness. It's not a denial of our feelings about what happened, but it's a willingness. So the Course in Miracles says, do you prefer to be right or to be happy? Because if you want to just be right, you can find a lot of people to agree with you. That you are the victim. And within the mortal plane, you might have been. Terrible things happen. Victory is not negative denial, but positive denial. I don't deny that it happened, but I deny its capacity to hold me back from the full actualization of my selfhood, in which this wound has done nothing but turn me into a bigger person than I would have been. Mm-hmm. And that is the miracle.
Yeah. I also loved that you talk a lot about ego. I mean, I wrote down forgiveness. I wrote down all these bullet points of things that I found so touching. But for the sake of time, one story. Can I give away a story that I thought was really powerful in the book?
Of course.
Because my problem is when I read authors' books and then I do a podcast with them, sometimes I give away the whole book, and then the author's like, "Why?"
That's kind of for the author. That's great, actually.
But I loved, there was a story you told, and you're going to have to correct me on who it was, but about how you went and saw this painting, and you were it was like sold for like millions of dollars, and you were like
$450 million.
Okay. And so you were like, who bought this painting? Like, this must be this magical like person. And then who did you find out bought it? I'm giving away the story, but who bought it?
By the way, there's a documentary actually on television about this right now called The Lost Leonardo. There were only 15 Leonardo da Vinci paintings in the world. And several years ago, there was this major thing where scholars were like, we think we have a lost Leonardo, and other people said no, and an international story of authentication and so forth. A friend of mine had told me it was on display at Christie's, would I like to see it? And the story there is that when I looked at it, it's called Salvatore Mundi, which is a picture of Jesus. And when I looked at it, I had this mystical experience that he is two words that sort of came to life for me, tenderness and power. He is all the tenderness. Think of all the baby kisses. Think of all the caresses of the world. Think of the most tender moment you could imagine, times all the universes. And think of all the power in the world, of the power to move universes. He is both those things. Mm-hmm. So I was blown away by this experience. I hadn't expected it. And it made me very interested. I started looking on the internet. Who is the buyer? Because it was a mystery buyer. And I read that afternoon that the mystery buyer was the Mohammed bin Salman, the MBS leader of Saudi Arabia, who is supposed the alleged murderer of Khashoggi and so forth. Mm-hmm. My first thought was, oh no, that's the last person who should have this precious treasure. And then I realized, where would Jesus most like to be? He wants to be in the place where he could be the greatest help. So if I had that mystical experience, may he have that mystical experience as my greatest hope.
The fact that your brain was able to go there and think that way, though, is incredible, because that would have taken most people wouldn't have come to that realization. So, that's like, I believe, like, such a gift that you were given, which I know you have, but just to be able to think that way, to be like, well, there's a reason behind this, and here's the reason. Why else would this be going on? Why else would this have happened?
Well, the Course in Miracles is a mind training. It's a psychological mind training in the relinquishment of a thought system based on fear and the acceptance instead of a thought system based on love. It is substituting for an old way of seeing things, a way of seeing things that is radically different. And it affects everything. It affects our experience of life. It affects all of our relationships and ultimately what happens in the world. And I think that that's what's going to happen with everything that you and I were talking about. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. I had a dream about Elon Musk last night.
Sorry, I made a face. Go ahead.
Well, I was doing a Course in Miracles class yesterday, and I was talking about the fact that over the years because I had just been reading in the Course, I do these readings of the text and how we have to love everyone, we have to love everyone, we have to love everyone. And I already knew the part where Martin Luther King Jr. said, God said I have to love everybody. He didn't say I have to like them. And I knew that forgiveness doesn't mean we have to have lunch and all of that. And over the last few years, I prayed a lot for Donald Trump, and I have gotten to the point, okay, I get it. I get his basic humanity. I get that he's an innocent child of God. I get that I just seriously disagree with him. I've really kind of gotten there emotionally about Donald Trump. And then Elon Musk shows up, and I'm back to page 1 of knowing that my heart is not love, love, love. Mm-hmm. But I started talking about that and really trying to work with that in terms of praying for that. Also, I want to say something. I think the fact that there's been so much negativity projected onto Donald Trump definitely exacerbated the situation, made things worse, no doubt about it. And so I was thinking about, with our attitude towards Elon Musk, who I do believe is a neo-Nazi. And even if he's not a Nazi, it doesn't matter. He gives dog whistles to those who are.
So is Steve Bannon, by the way.
Pardon?
Steve Bannon is too. Like, they're making it a known thing right now, and
these are dog whistles. They're signals, and it's very, very dangerous.
They very much so are.
I had a dream last night, and we were hanging out a little, like just sort of getting to know each other. I thought it was interesting.
I wonder what that means. It
means I'm trying. I do know this because I know this about Donald Trump. The fact that I seek to see him as a human being, and he is the democratically elected president of the United States, does not decrease my efficacy as an activist. It does not decrease my efficacy. As a matter of fact, I think it increases it, because that emotional negativity actually it weakens us. It's like when you do muscle testing, it only weakens you. Hatred and anger are like the white sugar of political activism. It gives you a high, but then you crash. It's an adrenaline high. And you cannot sustain this with what's going on right now. This is a marathon. And when you are doing the work of political activism, for instance, out of love, it's not out of hatred of Musk or hatred of Trump. If it weren't them at this point, it would be someone else. It's about love for our democracy, love for our freedom, love for our Constitution, love for our children's children, that we know it's an honor to be a citizen of this country and to bequeath that. That's much, and it doesn't make you less kick-ass. I think it makes you more. It sharpens your focus, sharpens your intelligence. I think that's a big deal right now. But sometimes, this is what I don't understand. This is an interesting, maybe you've noticed this too, Meghan. Sometimes when I talk about politics, people say, Marianne, where's the love? Where's the love? And they want to talk about loving Trump or loving Musk. I'm like, but what about loving those 75,000 people in the federal workforce whose lives have been traumatized? Why aren't you talking about loving all the people who are being hurt by this? I think that's an interesting thing.
But also, not to talk over you here, but that is a good point, because these people, many of whom that work for the federal government, served in the military. They decided
they're being traumatized.
They're being traumatized.
And many were veterans, and they've served their country well, and they're being demonized and they're being villainized by their own government and by the American people. What was the love for them?
I think, though, that you have a valid point. It's part of, I never really thought about it that way. I think that I have so much anger that I'm like, how is this happening? Why isn't anyone speaking up? Why is this happening? And I was reading last night that I just have to get to a point where I'm like, okay, this is happening. And I say this is probably, it annoys so many people for a reason. What is the reason behind it? I consider myself so lucky to be a woman. You know, I mean, all of the women right now are the ones that are speaking up. Jasmine Crockett, who is the governor of Maine? I am blanking on her name. That said, "I'll see you in court."
I'll see you in court.
Like this is our superpower, being female, and it's a real shame that you weren't president, because I would have been at the White House visiting you. But I'm just trying to
make you head of the faith office, Meghan.
Well, thank you very much. But I just want to say, for the sake of time and for all of my listeners, I want to ask you if there's a major takeaway from this new book. What is it? That's one question. And then I guess that's my one main question that I'll ask you, and then I'll end with something. But I want you to answer that for me.
That we aren't who we think we are. And when you were talking before about forgiveness, I think how to forgive, how to move on, how to grow from, how to be bigger than, how to not be defined by the wound. You know, one of the things I talk about in the book, actually, Meghan, I don't know if I talk about in the book. I don't know if I talk about this in the book. I was, my family, there was a home invasion when I was 17 years old. And it was a very terrible situation. And I definitely, the police came over, I was treated, I went to therapy and so forth. But I feel grateful for the fact that when I was 17 years old, no one who treated me, no psychiatrist or psychologist who helped me, we were not yet at a time in the culture that anyone placed into my thinking, by the way, this will define your life. I feel grateful for that. It just never occurred to me it was supposed to define my life. And later, I would talk to people who allowed their entire lives to be defined by things. In my career as in yours, and in your life, terrible, terrible things happen. This is not to say they don't. But some of the things that I have heard people talk about, and then I would say, can you tell me what happened? And I would go to myself, whoa, that's almost nothing compared to what I went through. Mm-hmm. The difference is that they had bought into a cultural meme that this will be your calling card. And I think that has been used to weaken women so much. And that's why I hope that this book, I love Jean Houston's concept of the sacred wound. that a sacred wound is something, yes, it happened. I'm a more compassionate person for other sufferers because it happened. And it has become, as you were saying, part of my superpower. Because I think that suffering gives us X-ray vision into the suffering of others. That's what's so dangerous about some of these men and what they're doing. They don't have a freaking clue what it feels like to be out of work and scared.
You just basically answered my question on why you need to keep using your voice, because we really honestly need you right now. And it makes me emotional. It makes me
Meghan,
really emotional. We need you.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Please keep using your voice. And
Thank
one
you.
other thing I want to say, because I'm the mother of 2 daughters. Okay. So
How old are they?
So Sophie is 15 and then
Who
Ella's
is my
11.
mother's name?
Oh,
What's
really?
What was the
Ella.
11-year?
Ella.
Oh, beautiful.
And so she's 11. And, you know, something that I read is like my trauma, like the things that I went through in my life, I can't put that on them.
No.
And so that was such a powerful thing. I mean, there's so many things in this book, listeners, that I really needed to hear. So I really cannot recommend the book enough. And I read it at the exact moment that I was supposed to read it. I read it at the exact moment that I was supposed to read it. And I honestly can tell you, like, please, everyone, don't give up. Like, we have work to do. And Marianne, I think you're amazing. I'm going to hold your book up. This camera is so... So anyways, if you're listening, The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love, I was so nervous in the beginning. I got through this entire thing. I didn't butcher anything like I thought I was going to. And I just adore you. So thank you so much for coming on.
It's lovely meeting you, and I hope we get a chance to meet in person. It was just great to talk to you, and thank you so much.
Come to LA anytime. Everyone, keep going. You matter. Your story matters. Thanks, Marianne.
God bless you, honey. Thank you.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.